Okay, so I need to preface this by saying that I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't wear a tinfoil hat. I don't think the government is watching my every move. Well, at least I didn't before all this. And I definitely don't believe in some grand Illuminati scheme. But after what I found on the dark web last year, yeah, I don't know what to think anymore. So, quick background, I was always kind of a tech nerd growing up. I got into coding in high school, built my first PC when I was 16. And by the time I was in college, I was way too deep into cybersecurity and ethical hacking. Not for any sketchy reasons, just out of pure curiosity. I liked figuring out how things worked, how data moved, how information could be hidden. And that curiosity eventually led me to the dark web. Now, if you don't know, the dark web isn't all hitmen and drug markets like Hollywood makes it seem. Most of it is just boring forums, weird collectors, and underground book clubs or whatever. But every once in a while, you find something that you wish you hadn't. This was one of those times. It all started when I found an old CIA leak, a massive data dump from the 1970s, just sitting on some dead forum. It was mostly declassified files, nothing too crazy, stuff about Cold War surveillance, old operations that never went anywhere. But then, tucked between all that bureaucratic nonsense, I saw it, a folder titled Project Crimson King. Now tell me that doesn't sound like some real deep state cover-up type of shit. The folder had exactly one document inside, a plain text file, no encryption, just sitting there like it was waiting for someone to open it. So I did. And the first thing I saw was a case number, case file number 19, 47-02, one status, redacted. Subject, Crimson King, unidentified serial offender, active, 1938 to 1949. My heart started racing. I wasn't sure why, but something about this felt off, like I wasn't supposed to be seeing it. I kept reading. The document detailed a series of brutal murders spanning over a decade, mostly in small towns across the US. But here's what made it different from every other serial killer case I'd ever read about. 1. The FBI never officially acknowledged these murders were connected. 2. Every single victim had their teeth removed. 3. There was a symbol, something like a crown, carved into their skulls. The deeper I read, the more my stomach turned. It described in graphic detail how the bodies were found, limbs arranged precisely like some kind of ritual. Some victims were drained of blood. Others had been found weeks after their deaths, yet showed almost no decomposition. But the worst part? The list of names at the end of the file, victims, locations, dates, and then right at the bottom, primary suspect, redacted, last known. Location, redacted possible relatives. See attached file, bloodline. The attached file wasn't there. Now at this point I'm shaking, because this is too much for some random dark web dump. It's too detailed, too real. And then I see it. One of the victims' names. I know this name because it's the same as my great uncle, the one my grandpa never talked about, the one who ran away when he was 19 and was never heard from again. I felt a pit in my stomach. I clicked back to the case file, my hands sweating as I scrolled through the descriptions again, and then, buried in a paragraph near the bottom, I found something that made my blood run cold. The suspect was believed to have relocated to Illinois in 1950 under a new identity. He was last seen in a small rural town where he reportedly started a family. My family is from a small rural town in Illinois, and my grandfather was born in 1950. At that moment, I swear, I could hear my own heartbeat. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at the screen. The room around me felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. It didn't make sense. My grandpa? The nicest, most normal guy I'd ever known? A serial killer? It couldn't be. But then, my screen glitched. For half a second, the text scrambled into symbols and static. Then a new message appeared at the bottom of the file. "We see you." I slammed my laptop shut so fast I almost broke it. And then, like clockwork, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My entire body was frozen. A few seconds later, a text popped up. Just 4 words. "Don't look any further." I didn't sleep that night. And the next morning, when I went to check the file again, it was gone. I didn't touch my laptop for days after that. Something about that message, "We see you," felt too direct, too personal. I'd spent years on the dark web, messing around with all kinds of shady sites, but nothing had ever felt like this. It was like someone was watching me in real time. And that text, "Don't look any further"? Yeah. No way in hell that was a coincidence. For a while, I tried to convince myself it was just a scare tactic. Some random person monitoring the old forum, messing with people who found the leak. Maybe a leftover script auto-sending creepy messages to anyone who accessed the file. But deep down, I knew that was bullshit. Because that file, the one with my great-uncle's name, it was gone, like it had never existed. The entire forum thread was wiped, and then things got worse. About a week after I found the file, I started noticing it. A black SUV. Now, I live in a pretty average neighborhood, nothing fancy, but not sketchy either. The kind of place where you recognize most of the cars that drive by. But this SUV, I had never seen it before. At first, I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. But then I started noticing the patterns. It would be parked down the street when I left for work. It would drive by slowly when I was outside. One night, around 2 a.m., I looked outside, and it was just sitting there, engine running, lights off. That was the night I knew something was really wrong. I went to bed freaked out as hell, but I told myself I was imagining things. Coincidence, random car, nothing serious. But the next morning, someone had been in my backyard. The gate was wide open, I never leave it open, and in the dirt, just outside my window, was a single boot print. My heart dropped. I checked my cameras because, yes, I have a security system, but the footage from that night, corrupted, all of it, like something had scrambled the video feed right around 2 a.m., the exact time I saw the SUV. I wasn't thinking straight at this point. My brain was in fight or flight mode, but I didn't even know what I was running from. I had no proof this had anything to do with the file, no proof it wasn't just some messed up coincidence. But then, something happened that made it undeniable. It was a Thursday. I remember because I had an early meeting and stopped at a Starbucks before heading in. I was still trying to act normal, but my paranoia was eating at me. I kept looking over my shoulder, checking reflections in the windows, half expecting to see that black SUV. And then I saw him. A man, sitting alone at a table, staring at me. He was wearing a black suit, like straight-up Men in Black type shit. And he had this weird, almost too perfect face, like someone trying to look generic on purpose. No beard, no scars, no defining features at all. Just a blank expression and dark sunglasses. At first, I thought, okay, maybe I'm just being weird. Maybe he's not actually looking at me. So I moved seats. He turned his head to follow me. That's when my stomach dropped. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check messages, and took a quick photo, just enough to see if he'd react. He did. The second I hit the button, he stood up. Not in a normal way either, like in one smooth movement. No hesitation, no wasted motion, precision. Then he started walking toward me. My chest tightened. I grabbed my coffee and booked it out of there, not even looking back. I didn't stop until I was in my car with the doors locked. I took a deep breath, heart pounding, and opened my camera roll to look at the picture. But there was nothing there. The photo was gone, like I had never taken it. And that's when I finally understood. This wasn't some internet hoax. This wasn't a joke. I had found something I wasn't supposed to find, and now someone was trying to erase it. I started my car and sped out of the parking lot, checking my mirrors the whole way home. And sure enough, the black SUV was right behind me. I don't remember driving home. My brain was on autopilot, heart hammering, eyes glued to the rearview mirror. The black SUV stayed behind me the whole way, never getting too close, never pulling ahead, just watching. I took turns I didn't need to. Drove through neighborhoods I'd never been in. But every time I checked my mirrors, they were still there. Like a shadow I couldn't shake. Then right before I turned onto my street, they disappeared. 1 second, headlights in my mirror. The next, nothing. No turnoff. No side street, just gone. And somehow that was worse. Because now I knew for sure they wanted me to know I was being followed. When I got home, I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid. I locked every door, checked every window, made sure all my curtains were shut. And then, for the first time since this all started, I called my dad. Now my dad is a pretty normal guy, retired, loves fishing, watches too much History Channel. We don't talk often, but I figured if anyone in my family knew something about my grandpa's past, it would be him. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. "Hey, kiddo, everything all right?" His voice sounded off, like he already knew something was wrong. I swallowed, gripping my phone tighter. "Dad, listen, this is going to sound crazy, but what do you know about Grandpa, like, before he moved to Illinois?" Silence. Not the normal thinking about it silence. The heavy, unnatural silence that makes your skin crawl. "Dad?" He sighed. "Why are you asking me this?" I hesitated. I couldn't tell him the truth. Not all of it. I just found something weird online, some old files. I think it might have to do with Grandpa's past. More silence. Then finally, "You need to drop this." My stomach knotted. "Wait, what?" "You heard me. Drop it. Whatever you think you found, forget about it. This isn't something you want to mess with." His tone was sharp, scared. I felt my throat go dry. "So, you do know something?" Dad exhaled, like he was debating whether to say anything else. Then he dropped his voice to a near whisper. "Grandpa wasn't who you think he was." The line clicked dead. I stared at my phone, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. That was all the confirmation I needed. I was right. At this point, my paranoia was through the roof. I barely slept. Every time a car drove by, my heart spiked. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched. And then, one night, I remembered something. My grandpa's house still existed. After he passed, my dad inherited it, but no one ever moved in. It was too old, too out of the way, just sat there, empty, collecting dust. If there were any answers, that was the only place left to look. So, like a complete dumbass in a horror movie, I grabbed my keys and drove out there. The house was exactly how I remembered it. Small, isolated. The kind of place that felt out of time. I parked out front, but the second I stepped out of my car, I felt it. Like I wasn't alone. The air was still. Too still. No wind, no night sounds, just silence. I forced myself forward, trying to ignore the feeling crawling up my spine. The front door was locked, but I still had a key. It stuck in the lock. I had to force it open. The inside smelled like dust and old wood. Everything was exactly how it had been left, like my grandpa had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. I moved quickly, checking old cabinets, drawers, anywhere that might hold something important. But it wasn't until I reached the basement door that my pulse really started pounding, because it was chained shut with a padlock. I stood there, staring at it, heart racing. I'd been in this house 100 times growing up, and that door had never been locked before. Something was down there. I should have left. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but I didn't. Instead, I did something incredibly stupid. I found a crowbar in the garage, one my grandpa used to keep near his tools, and I forced the lock open. It snapped with a loud crack, the sound echoing through the empty house. And then I pushed the door open. The second I stepped into the basement, a wave of rot hit me. It was faint, like something that had been dead for a long time, buried deep, its scent barely lingering. I gagged, covering my nose, and turned on my phone's flashlight. The wooden steps creaked under my weight. The further I went down, the stronger the smell got. And then I saw it, a trunk, old, wooden, shoved into the corner like someone had tried to hide it. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. The lock was already broken. I lifted the lid, and that's when I realized I had made a horrible mistake. Inside the trunk, buried under layers of dust and old crumbling fabric, were teeth. Hundreds of them, yellowed, some cracked, all human, and beneath them, barely visible in the dim light, a rusted knife, and something carved into the wood beneath it, a symbol, a crown. I felt my breath catch, my vision blurred, and then a floorboard creaked behind me. I wasn't alone. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. That creak behind me felt like a gun to the back of my head, sharp, immediate, final. My phone's flashlight trembled in my grip as I slowly turned my head, expecting to see, I don't even know, a shadow, a figure, something. But there was nothing there, just empty space. But I knew I wasn't alone. That basement was old, the kind of place that absorbed sound. But now? The silence wasn't right. It was dense, heavy, like something was in the room with me, holding its breath. I stepped back, my foot hitting the trunk full of teeth, my stomach twisting as I realized someone put these here, not something, someone. Someone who had lived in this house. Someone who had locked the basement door. Someone who might still be here. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Not words, more like murmurs, distant and low, like voices traveling through water. I spun, phone light darting across the basement, hitting shelves, rusted tools, old furniture. Then a shadow moved, not a trick of the light, not my imagination. Something shifted in the darkness just beyond my flashlight's reach. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Who's there?" I meant to sound strong. I didn't. The whispering stopped. And then something hit the floor, a soft thud, like a footstep. I ran. I sprinted up the stairs, heart in my throat, lungs burning. As I reached the top, I heard it. Footsteps behind me, not running, just following, slow, deliberate. I slammed the basement door shut and threw my weight against it, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the broken chain. For a second I thought I felt pressure on the other side, like someone was standing there, just waiting. I bolted for the front door, wrenching it open so hard it nearly tore off the hinges. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, engine on, tires screeching as I peeled out of the driveway. In my rearview mirror, the house sat silent, empty. And then a light flickered on in the upstairs window. I didn't go home, I drove, for hours. I don't even remember where I went. Gas stations, side streets, nowhere that made sense. I just needed to get away. But eventually exhaustion caught up to me. I pulled into a cheap motel off the highway, paid in cash, and barricaded myself in the room. That's when I noticed my phone had a new notification. No number, no sender, just one new message. I opened it with shaking hands. It was an image of an old, yellowed letter, a letter addressed to my grandfather. And at the very bottom, the same crown symbol carved into the basement trunk. The message below the image was just 2 words. You know. I dropped my phone, because now I knew exactly what they meant. My grandpa wasn't the killer. He was being hunted by one. And now, so was I. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that letter, that damn crown symbol at the bottom, and the message, you know. I sat in that motel room, back against the wall, staring at my phone like it was a live grenade. Who sent that picture? Where the hell did they get that letter? And what exactly did I know? Because if my grandpa wasn't the serial killer, then who was, and why were they still watching me? I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I remember is my phone buzzing again. Another message. This one was different. A location, coordinates to be exact. No text, no explanation, just a single pin dropped on a map. I hesitated. Every part of me was screaming, nope, bad idea, leave this alone. But it was too late for that, wasn't it? I'd already gone too deep. I had to see this through. So, like an absolute moron, I got in my car and started driving. The coordinates led me 2 hours north, past the city, down miles of deserted back roads until the pavement turned to dirt. I almost turned around at least 10 times, but something about this, about the way I was being led, felt too calculated to ignore. Finally, I reached it. A house, old, abandoned, hidden deep in the trees like it was trying to be forgotten. And the second I saw it, I knew. I had been here before, not in person, but in the case file. This was one of the murder sites, one of the places where they found a body, and now I was standing in front of it. I took a deep breath, gripping my phone like a lifeline, and stepped inside. The inside was ruined, floorboards rotted through, wallpaper peeling. The air was thick with the scent of dust and decay. But in the center of the main room, beneath the collapsed ceiling, a table. And on that table, a single file. It looked just like the CIA document I found on the dark web. Same yellowed paper, same classified markings, and the title, Project Crimson King. I flipped it open, hands shaking, and the first thing I saw was a photo, black and white, blurry, but I recognized the face instantly, my grandfather. Except it wasn't a mugshot, it was surveillance, him looking over his shoulder, terrified. My stomach twisted as I read the first few lines of text. Subject, Daniel Graves, alias redacted. Status, target threat level, high. Summary. Subject is believed to be the only known survivor of the Crimson King killings. Despite multiple identity changes and relocation efforts, tracking suggests the entity has continued pursuit. Further investigation suggests the killings were never random, they were selective. The victims were all descendants of a specific bloodline. My blood ran cold. I scanned further, flipping through pages, trying to make sense of it. And then I found it. The real suspect, the actual Crimson King, a name I didn't recognize, but the description. It matched the man I saw at the coffee shop. Black suit, too perfect face, sunglasses, like someone trying to look human. My breath caught in my throat. I turned to the last page, another image, a symbol burned into old leather, the crown, and underneath it, one final line of text. The Crimson King is not a man. The Crimson King does not die. The Crimson King finds you. A creak echoed through the house. My head snapped up, and there, standing in the doorway, was him, the man in the suit, the one from Starbucks, the one from the dark web files. His head tilted slightly, like he was amused. I took a step back, my pulse hammering. "Who the hell are you?" He smiled, not a normal smile. Something wrong, too wide, too cold. Then in a voice that sounded almost human, "You know who I am." The last thing I remember is running, tearing through the woods, branches cutting my face, my lungs burning, and behind me, those slow, unhurried footsteps, like he knew I would never outrun him. I don't remember getting home. I don't remember anything after that except waking up in my apartment, my clothes covered in dirt, my phone completely wiped, every file, every message, gone, like it never happened. But last night, I got another text, no sender, no number, Just one final message. Run! And outside my window, parked across the street, the black SUV, watching, waiting, because now I know the truth. And the Crimson King, he never lets his secrets live.